Oh, do you?
Okay. Well, there would not be a meeting without Mr. Donahue giving us an update, right? Hi, Mr. Donahue. There's nothing going on.
Our finest hour.
Our finest hour.
Well, Madam Chair, members of the board, Nick Donahue, I'm here to give you an update on where things stand with the General Assembly. Just as a really important caveat, the General Assembly is still in town. That means many of the things I tell you could change before everything hopefully adjourns this Saturday. Saturday is the scheduled adjournment of the General Assembly. At the moment, the budget is still in conference, so I cannot tell you what the conference report on that might look like. But what I do want to do is just walk through some of the bills we discussed with you last time, give you an update on their fate or current status, whatever the case might be, and then also discuss some things that were introduced after you were last here and talk about where those are and any importance they may have. So let's start with the big kind of issue in the room, which was the I-81 corridor improvement plan. The governor did introduce legislation sponsored by Delegate Landis, Delegate Austin, Senator Obenshain, and Senator Carrico. That legislation is still alive. It is in conference. I will say, though, that it unfortunately does not currently include a funding source. So there was a lot of discussion during the Senate and in the House, kind of in one-on-one meetings, but also in the Senate Finance Committee regarding what would be the appropriate funding source. I think ultimately this bill lacks one at the moment because the legislators were not able to coalesce around that which they believed to be the most appropriate funding source. There were many who wanted to impose a tax of some form. Really looking at statewide taxes, interestingly enough. So as you recall, when I met with you last time, there were two other revenue generating bills that we discussed. One was Senator Hanger's bill, which would have done a 2.1% fuels tax increase along the planning district commissions on the 81 corridor. One of the issues with that bill, again, is for diesel, trucks remit through a system called the International Fuels Tax Agreement when they buy fuel. So even if they don't buy gas in Virginia, they end up paying, because again, they have several hundred-gallon tanks. They could easily drive through Virginia without buying gas. The International Fuels Tax Agreement does not capture tax money from a regional tax source. And so ultimately, that kind of resulted in some discussion on that bill, and that bill was rolled into Senator Edwards' bill 1470, which did report out of the Senate Finance Transportation Subcommittee to the full committee, which would have increased, or actually, excuse me, it would have doubled the wholesale tax on gasoline and increased the wholesale tax on diesel by I think it's 84 or 88%. I'm not great at math. 5 divided by 6, if anyone's better. That's what it would have done there. And then it would have taken approximately, sorry.
82.5.
There we go. Somebody's better at math. And it would have dedicated $200 million off the top from those from the funds for the 81 corridor. In the Senate Finance Committee, that bill was made to look very different than it came out of the subcommittee, and all of the revenue generating provisions were stripped out of it, and ultimately what was left was a Section 1 bill directing the Secretary of Transportation to study the impact of fuel economy and electric vehicles on Virginia's revenue streams and report back to the General Assembly by December 15th of 2019 regarding ways to address kind of the unsustainability of our revenue streams. While that may seem like a watered down version of its former self, I will say I think the members of the General Assembly heard the Secretary's point that we've hit an inflection point when it comes to fuels tax, because for the first time ever, VMT has gone up and our actual collections have gone down year over year. And by gone down, I don't mean we missed a projection. We thought we'd be 4 and we were 2%. I mean, we were supposed to grow at 1% and we went down 1.4%. And I think folks have really heard that, and that's important. That's something very important for the General Assembly members to understand. That bill is currently in the House Appropriations Committee. Similar language to that is included in the House budget, so ultimately we do expect that direction and charge to the Secretary to pass, though I think it's more likely to be included in the budget than in this bill. The 81 bills would establish the 81 Corridor Fund. They would establish an 81 committee. Congratulations, members of the board, Mr. Smoot, Mr. Whitworth, and Mr. Stinson. I see 2 of you aren't here, but you'll be at the I-81 corridor meetings if these bills come out of committee. And that committee has similar membership as the introduced bill, so it's the 5 planning district commission chairs along the corridor, the 3 CTB members from the corridor. They did increase the legislative membership. So instead of being 3 House members and 2 Senate members, it's 4 House members and 3 Senate members in the House bill and 4 and 4 in the Senate bill. And that committee is charged to discuss in public ways that would be potentially build consensus to try and fund I-81. Again, there's some other differences in these bills. They're currently in conference. We'll see what comes out of the conference here in the next few days. Again, all conference reports have to be out by Friday, I believe it is. Maybe it's Saturday, actually. But again, that information will be out later this week, and we'll see what ultimately is included with that. The tolling proposal drew concerns from a host of different reasons. Some of the folks in Northern Virginia were concerned about the annual pass for commuters that exists, despite numerous attempts by the Secretary and myself trying to explain the differences between dynamic pricing or a road built with tolls versus a toll-free interstate being converted to a toll road. And I will maintain very vigorously there's a dramatic difference between the two. However, that was not persuasive with the majority of the members in our discussions. So,
although we still get asked about it every day.
We do. At the same time, the gas tax bill also was not persuasive, and one of the major concerns that was noted with that, particularly with the statewide tax increase, was you'd be taking $200 million off the top and then running the rest of the money through the formula. And so the net effect of that, if you're from Hampton Roads or Northern Virginia, is you are taxing yourself for your own roads in both regions, and then you'd also be taxing yourself for 81. And then you'd run the money through the formula. So ultimately, I think that kind of
loved that idea.
That kind of impacted the future of that legislation. There were several other bills that we were watching that I just want to update you guys on. Delegate Watts had a bill that would have basically put in place the governor's amendments to the WMATA bill, which would have generated around $30 million annually for NVTA. That bill was left in House rules. Senator Stanley had a bill that would have dedicated redirected recordation tax revenues in approximately 25 to 30 years that are currently in the Route 58 program to a new I-73 corridor development plan. That bill passed the Senate 26-13, but was tabled in the House Appropriations Transportation Subcommittee. And again, I want to note, that's a very forward-looking bill, if you will, because again, it would take effect when the Route 58 debt service was retired. We are just getting ready to do the first of 3 debt issuances for Route 58 next year. The final one would be, I believe, 4 years from now. So again, I think it's a 30-year look ahead, if you will, from when that would have been effective if it had made it out of the General Assembly. On the online sales tax front, that legislation has passed both the House and Senate, and it is before the governor for his consideration. I don't believe it is a 7-day bill. I don't think it's been formally communicated at this stage. Importantly, I think for you all, it does include provisions that would run the online sales tax through the existing sales tax formula and repeal the provision that would reduce the gas tax from 5.1 back to 3.6%. That is a very big positive. That means instead of losing $100 million, we'll get a little bit of money. Then again, that money is baked into the figures you've been using, but that is very important. And again, it did pass both chambers with very, very significant margins. There were several bills dealing with I-66, one from Delegate Delaney and one from Delegate Hugo. Both of those were tabled in House Appropriations. There was a separate bill from Delegate Hugo that has passed both the House and Senate that would prohibit the board from exercising its authority to impose tolls on a limited access highway that previously was a secondary road that is between 30 and 33 miles in length. And if you're wondering what that is the Fairfax County Parkway. There's the only road in the Commonwealth that would meet those requirements, though at the moment it's not a limited access highway, so you don't even have authority to impose tolls on it anyway. But should it become a limited access highway in the future, this bill would restrict your authority from doing so. That has passed both the House and Senate. There were several bills dealing with the Dulles Greenway. There was one from Senator Stanley and Delegate LaRock that would have dramatically changed the governing regulations of how the SEC what investments it considers when it determines whether or not the toll rate imposed by the Greenway operator was appropriate. That was a pretty contentious bill. Ultimately, Senator Stanley's bill failed to report 6-7 after about 2 hours of debate in the Senate Transportation Committee. There was a separate set of bills that the Secretary and I worked on with Delegates Bell and Reed and Senator Favola that would have asked the Secretary to study whether there were opportunities through the combined operations of the Dulles Toll Road and Dulles Greenway to lower tolls, implement distance-based pricing, and increase person throughput along that corridor. If you take a look at travel trends in Northern Virginia, particularly east-west travel, what you'll see is over the last 10 to 15 years, as you've seen large toll increases on those two roads, the share of east-west traffic, when you look at Route 7, Route 267, which is the toll road, 66 and 50, is the percentage of traffic heading on Route 267 has dropped by about 10%. So it used to be around 35% of all east-west traffic, and it's now around 25%. That's not good news for those other parallel roads, and so we think there might be some opportunities there. However, that bill was also tabled in the House Transportation Committee.
Still think that is a great idea.
However, we do not need permission to do studies, but sometimes we can be directed to do them. A bill from Delegate Stolley has passed both the House and the Senate, which would allow the Rail Enhancement Fund to use federal funds for freight rail projects as its match. So as you may recall, the Rail Enhancement Fund does require a 30% non-state match. That initially started as private. It was then expanded to local, and with this change, it would now allow for federal funds to match the Rail Enhancement Fund, provided those funds were for a freight rail project. And that language is intentionally vague because you could use multiple federal funding sources there, and so we're just trying to capture all potential uses that could move forward there.
We do want to acknowledge the Port and DRPT for really working to get that language right.
Mm-hmm. One other large issue for the board is there is two competing provisions related to the transit operating performance formula. As you all recall, Director Mitchell and her agency were directed by the WMATA and Transit Reform Bill last session to implement a funding formula to prioritize operating funding without any additional operating funding being put into the system. That predictably has created some consternation. Whenever you change the allocation of funds but add no new money, there are invariably winners and losers. Depending on how you want to do it, different groups of people become winners or losers, as the case may be. There are two proposals that are out there. One would provide $3 million out of DRPT's operating reserve to hold transit agencies harmless for a year, and a second one, which was included in the Senate budget, would have delayed the implementation of this, I believe, for 2 years, and then specifically directed certain measures and be used in the performance formula that allocates funding there. So I expect this issue will ultimately be adjudicated in the budget conference, and so we'll see where the negotiations end up hopefully in the next few days. Again, Director Mitchell, I know, has worked very closely with both sides, provided lots of information to folks. And again, there's $90 million in this program. If we use a performance system that actually changes how funds flow, which, based on my understanding of is what the goal is, there will be a winner and loser in that. And I think the ultimate question is who's winning and who's losing, and how does that all kind of turn out, unless the General Assembly puts additional funds into that program.
Is there anything you want to
add? No, just to mention that we were originally planning to, as you may recall, we briefed you all last month on this, and we were originally planning to bring that to you all this month for a vote. But given the contradictory language that's still in the budget right now, we've decided to postpone that until March, so we can see what the outcome of that legislation is. And based on that, we'll be briefing all of you individually before the March meeting to talk with you about what happened and what it looks like we're going to be doing going forward.
There were also two bills dealing with the smart scale process. There was one that would have added a new factor dealing with resiliency, specifically, or with evacuation routes and the resiliency there, and another that would have said that in Northern Virginia you could only fund projects that had congestion reduction. Even I can't explain it clearly at the moment because I'm a little tired, but basically it would have said if there's a project that makes any car go any amount slower than it currently does, even if that's the intent for safety purposes, you cannot fund it if there's any project that allows any car to drive faster than it currently does, even if it's 0.1 miles per hour, if it's unfunded. Both those bills were tabled in the Transportation Committee and did not advance. And then with that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Again, several things are still up in the air, particularly the budget. There weren't many amendments to the transportation section relative to others, so I don't have much to report there. But again, we will see the conference report hopefully here in the next 2 or 3 days, and we'll obviously update you at the next meeting.
Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The Robert O. Norris Bridge bill. Can you help us with that
I
a
meant
little
to
bit?
mention that one. I apologize. So there is a...
Is that, and specifically, does that language correlate to our vital structures? Because it calls it critical structures. It speaks to bridges. So are we, like, we did a vital structure thing, right? That we were directed to do.
Madam Chair, Mr. Miller, so I do apologize. There was one piece of, or two pieces of legislation introduced after you all met in January. One was Senate Bill 1749, and the other was House Bill 2748. Both of these pieces of legislation have passed both houses, and I believe Senate Bill 1749 is a 7-day bill. This legislation is a follow-on to the special structures, as it was called in the budget, vital structures, as it was renamed by you all, and it is now called the Robert O. Norris Bridge and Special or Critical Structures Fund. This bill has several specific components to it. One of those is important for the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel procurement there. It would provide some flexibility to this board to help fund the southern trestles, which is something we did discuss with you all at the last meeting. Then after that, and I think kind of important statewide and over the long term, is there is a provision directing you all to examine our current performance targets for pavements and bridges and to look at what amount of money from the State of Good Repair program as well as from the Highway Maintenance and Operating program could we take to be able to fund these special structures as identified in the vital structures report you considered. What would and then what would be our performance targets for pavement and bridge that would be sustainable over a 20-year period? And then it actually directs and provides that you all shall allocate that amount of money out of those two programs starting in July 1, 2020. And so it creates the fund that those would go into to fund these structures.
Does that mean that we would, that the pavement piece of these vital structures, not the underlying piece? You know, I mean, you're talking about pavement, but you're not, I'm talking about bridges.
No, Madam Chair, Mr. Miller, I think it's telling us to reevaluate our current pavement and bridge targets. We're looking at what could be a sustainable target if we took money out of the HMOF and the State of Good Repair program to fund the replacement of those 25 special structures. I think some folks have noted that we are well in excess of the kind of targets in our current performance today.
Right, so if we dial them back to a certain target,
yes.
How much money would that free up?
And could that allow us to fund the special structures?
Gotcha.
Or vital structures or critical structures, or you know which 25 bridges I'm talking about.
Right.
Yes, because I believe, the recommendation that came out of the vital structures report was we needed to take a more comprehensive look at how we can fund this. But includes the targets, maintenance, state of good repair.
And again, this was legislation introduced independently by Senator McDougal and then Delegate Hodges. So I think they both represent districts where include the Robert O. Norris Bridge. So I'm guessing that's where the name came from.
We appreciate that. I know Ms. Hines certainly did.
Madam Secretary.
Mr. Dodson.
A couple of questions. Who are the 4 senators appointed to this I-81 study group?
Madam Chair, Mr. Dodson, so again, it could be 3 or 4 senators or some other number, because that is one of the differences being debated in conference, but those would be selected by the President of the Senate.
Okay. The other issue I was going to ask, going through these ones, there's this is from the General Assembly staff report was given out. The 29 Eastern bypass evaluation, was that a bill put in by one of the senators from our area?
I believe there was a joint resolution put in by Senator Peake. That bill was, I believe, tabled in the Senate Finance Committee, though there was a provision concluded in the Senate Finance Transportation Subcommittee report, so that is one of the issues that's ultimately being hashed out by the conferees. I would note that I believe the language in the subcommittee report from the Senate was slightly watered down from the studied version, because some of the discussion at the Senate Finance Committee was that what was being asked in the budget would not have a physical impact, whereas the joint resolution, I believe, was tabled because of a physical impact. And so we'll see what happens there ultimately, but there was a slight difference between the two.
I see you in the hallways of the General Assembly, too. There was a trooper that was murdered in near Farmville recently, Lucas Dow, and I see there's legislation for...
This is where I need to hand it over to Joanne Maxwell. There's a
Okay.
discrete number of bills that I keep track of, but
Okay.
she is very capable of going through the rest of these. I will probably give you inaccurate information if I try and answer that question.
Okay.
So I'm going to exit stage left and let Joanne go.
I was going to ask, officers who's murdered recently, serving a warrant on someone who's tried to, but my question is, which is fine, but there's interest in Amherst County, where he served at, to have another bridge. This is just a petition, just start. Is there anything about, if this petition, he's from Southwest Virginia, and it's wonderful, it seemed like a wonderful young man. Is there any prohibition about having two bridges named after anybody in the state code if it comes up?
Madam Chair, no, there's not. And there are even times where you can name the same bridge a couple of times, and you can actually incorporate the prior name, but there's nothing in the code. And I know there was some discussions about which bridge or facility should be named, so I know that's on the minds of the legislators.
The other one, that's the North Virginia one, it said VDOT to stay to purchase the Dulles Greenway. Does that mean from, it was from Senator Black, is that correct?
Yes, Madam Chair. This particular resolution moved out of House Rules Committee yesterday, so it's headed, I mean, it has basically passed. And so this would not be the first time that VDOT has studied purchase of the Greenway. I think the last time that we studied was 2013. The issues that we were to look at in doing that study are slightly different from the issues that are involved or dictated by this particular study. But at the end of the day, the last study found that it basically would not be feasible to purchase it. I think the primary issue there was that we found that the purchase price far exceeded the market value of the asset.
Last question, a local engineer said there was a bill put in by Senator Peake for $100,000 to study Route 60 going from 2-lane to 4-lane from the Powelltown Chesterfield line to the town of Amherst. Was that, I didn't see it. It must have been, is that something still current, or do you know?
Madam Chair, if it's not on this list, it is not. It is no longer active.
Okay, that's what I
so.
assumed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Dodson?
And Madam Chair, there was one other study that it looks like likely the CTB will need to be doing, and that's the I-95 corridor. So that is another study that is directed directly at CTB. Finally, there's one other minor, very minor bill, but it was extremely important to the senator that heads or chairs Senate Transportation, and that is a bill that dealt with naming by the Commonwealth Transportation Board or namings of highways. Currently, under the law, when a bridge or a facility is named after an individual, the locality that is in which the particular facility is located is the entity that has to approve the naming, and then the locality has to agree to pay for the signage. In this bill, which is now passed, if it involves a state official, then the entity that has actually, for whom the state official worked, is the entity that will be approving the naming, and the purchase or the price for the signage, the cost of the signage, is to come from Commonwealth transportation funds. So that's going to be a slight change. You all, it won't be that significant. We don't believe that, I mean, we haven't seen that many namings in the last few years for state officials, but nevertheless, it's a slight change for you all.
Mr. Johnson?
Madam Secretary, do we know what we're looking to study on Route 95?
I think there's, some of the details are dictated. Let me look at your sheet. I will say that in looking at the study itself, we did determine that it would be very similar to the I-81 study. It would entail very similar activities. I can't find it at this point. There it is. Basically, it is only for mile marker 118 through the Springfield interchange, but Basically, and I can get you more details, actually. I can certainly provide more details as to the specific items to be studied. But staff concluded in looking at the study when they were reviewing the bill that it's going to be very similar to I-81.
And I think, and I agree with you, I think it was, actually to be modeled a little bit after I-81, the process, the identification of improvements, very much because people appreciated how the 81 study had been conducted.
And Madam Chair, I think the one difference in this case is that we do have a hot lanes operator in the area, which was not an issue presented by the 81 study.
Right. And I believe it was something, too, that the commissioner had last year expressed a willingness to do in looking at the corridor. So.
Thank you.
Madam Secretary.
Ms. Hines.
And I'm sorry, Joanne, I don't have the bill number, but there was a concern raised in Northern Virginia about a bill that was put in related to joining the state joining some of the climate change or the greenhouse gas emission coalitions, and that might pose some problems relative to using CMAQ money. And just wonder if there's an update on that.
Madam Chair, Ms. Hines, there were, I believe, 2 bills, both sponsored by Delegate Poindexter. One was House Bill 2269, and I apologize, I don't recall the other bill number. Those both passed both chambers by party line votes. I know at least one of those is a 7-day bill, and I apologize. A 7-day bill basically means by this Saturday, the governor will have amended, signed, or vetoed that legislation, and it'll be back before the Assembly for its consideration. Those are typically done with bills that have a high level of consensus or that people want to make sure are discussed promptly. We did have discussion with some of the localities in Northern Virginia regarding this legislation. I don't believe this would impact their use of CMAQ funds because you do not have to be a member of any transportation or climate change initiative or regional greenhouse gas program to use your CMAQ money. So I don't think it has any impacts from that perspective.
But good question. Anything else? Okay, well, thank you both. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, Nick. As they said, though, we're still in the middle of session, so anyway.
Could happen.
It's always interesting. Pardon me?
Anything could happen.
Anything could happen. That's exactly right. Amy White, who is Assistant Secretary of Transportation, has been kind of holding the repository of all the legislation across this Secretariat. And the only one I think that wasn't mentioned was the towing compact bill. Do you want to give a quick update on that? Which is something we're doing with DC and Maryland. So I just mentioned that to you.
Madam Secretary, members of the board, the Potomac River Bridge Towing Compact, SB 1296, has made it through both chambers. It's not yet enrolled, but what that legislation does is add the remaining 4 bridges over the Potomac to that compact with Maryland and DC. So now all of those bridges will be covered by this compact, which helps any law enforcement personnel who's nearby, who's closest to an incident on any of those bridges to respond regardless of jurisdiction. So it's a safety, highway operations and incident management bill, but it's also one of 3 topics covered in an incident management task force among the 3 jurisdictions that's been going on for over a year. It continues, and VDOT and Virginia have taken a very active role. So that is one of the 3 topics. We've also talked about the move over legislation, so moving over for emergency vehicles. And that's something we continue to work on. A couple of bills along that topic did not make it through this session. But our Potomac River Bridge Towing Compact has, Maryland and DC have also agreed to pass similar legislation. So they have our language. They will pass mirror legislation so that it can go into effect in all 3 jurisdictions. Unfortunately, Maryland did drop the ball during this session, so we will have to wait a year for that. But DC has agreed because they have a rolling legislative session to implement theirs as soon as Maryland complies as well. Any questions?
And Amy took the lead on getting that initiated, so thank you.
Should have taken the lead in Maryland.
Well, we have an enactment clause, so it's all good. It's all good. So, I cannot see. Yes, Kathy McGee is back there. Innovation Committee met this morning, and so I was just going to ask Kathy McGee, our Director of Research and Innovation, just to give us an update from the committee this morning.
Madam Secretary, thank you for the opportunity to give you just a summary of our meeting this morning. We did start with a great summary from one of our members, Scott Kaspowitz, about his trip to LA to visit the Boring Company and all that he learned about Hyperloop and Loop and the Boring Company itself and the opportunities to improve the way we bore underground tunnels. And his assessment of where we stand with those technologies. So we really appreciate his sharing that information with us. I will tell you that he also suggested a way that we can better share information with all of you about technologies that we see on the horizon, and we'll be working collaboratively to put together a briefing book for you, and then perhaps give you regularly scheduled updates as things change on those technologies in the briefing book. So more to come on that, and I appreciate the suggestion and the offer of assistance in putting that together. We also had a presentation from Virginia Langham, who is the Connected and Automated Vehicle Program Manager at VDOT. She put together a workshop on automated vehicles for VDOT staff several weeks ago. And really the opportunity that was there was to provide a level setting for all of us in terms of the conversations we have about automated vehicles, and to make sure that when we're using terminology, it means the same thing to all of us, and to bring in some of the folks in VDOT who perhaps haven't been as engaged in those conversations, but will be impacted as we move forward towards an automated future. So we had maintenance folks and people from structure and bridge, and traffic engineering, and communications, and just really across the agency to talk about what automation will mean to the way we provide transportation services and the core functions that we've established in VDOT. Those conversations will continue to happen across the Commonwealth, and as the meetings move around, we'll be inviting localities to participate because much of the sort of automated shared use mobility future will rest in the hands of our localities. And so we want to bring them into the conversation, as well as DRPT and state police, and certainly DMV from the regulation side. So we will continue to have those conversations, and if you would like, we can make you aware of meetings that might be happening in your areas of the Commonwealth so that you can participate in those conversations as well. The initial meeting really was modeled after something that happened at the federal level. Last year, there were a number of these workshops held across the country on different topic areas: freight, data, infrastructure. In our meetings, we're trying to combine all of those as opposed to stovepiping the individual issues. So I think it's a really great opportunity to make sure everyone understands where the technology is and where we're headed with it. I then took just a few minutes to update the committee on a number of things that are happening. For those of you who aren't aware, there is a local Virginia company developing automated vehicle technology. Perrone Robotics is the name of the company, and they are working with Albemarle County and Jaunt to do a demonstration of a low-speed electric neighborhood vehicle. A shuttle, basically, that would be automated in the Crozet area of Albemarle County, and it's anticipated that that demonstration will go live in March, towards the end of March. The important thing to note about that particular demonstration is not a one-off. They have plans to expand their work in the automated area with Jaunt into the future, and I think that's a really good point of departure for that particular demonstration. So many of them are one and done, and they really do have a plan for how they bring automation into their future services. We also discussed briefly an effort that we're getting underway with Transurban and DBI and Virginia Tech to work on automated crash cushions, the truck-mounted attenuators that are so important to providing safety for our workers in work zones. Unfortunately, they can be quite hazardous for the people who drive them, so if we can remove the driver from that vehicle, that would be a great safety advancement. And then finally, Audi did release today their press release about our work with them to provide signal timing information, which they're providing directly into their vehicles in Northern Virginia. The press release acknowledges that Virginia is the largest deployment they've had to date, with all of our signals in the region going live in their system. So we're really excited about that and look forward to providing them additional signal information as our central system goes online and we have the ability to provide that statewide. I believe that was it. Any questions?
Then the announcement's very exciting.
Yes.
So, and I would say this, that I've been trying to, as we're making these announcements publicly, to make sure that the board is also receiving the press releases. So I do think when we do that with the Audi release too, that the board also gets it. I just asked that. Mr. Caswood.
Madam Secretary, thank you. I just wanted to comment on Kathy's identification of the crash barrier program, that we will maintain ownership of the intellectual property or any developments that come from that, so we can potentially benefit from that in the future. I thought that was an interesting approach for a governmental entity. I also wanted to just take a minute and say, I think what Audi did today and that announcement is going to be something we'll remember and look back on. It's, to my knowledge, the first time that we have a real-time application in people's cars using our data portal to improve traffic flow and to improve their mobility through the corridor. It's a huge deal. And I think we're going to see a lot follow them, and there's going to be a lot more of this, but it's facilitated by not only the implementation of these smart controls, but by the availability of that information in our data portal. So my compliments to all who've been part of that. I know there's been a lot of hard work. It's a big day.
I don't know if Morali and Hari are still here, but they certainly played an important role.
Huge role.
And whereas other states are doing it kind of signal by signal, we're able to, how many in Northern Virginia?
Over 1,400.
Signals at one time that we're able to actually bring into that system. So I thank you for saying
Are
that.
they VDOT only, or are they locality signals as well?
To date, they're VDOT signals, but we certainly would extend the opportunity to our local partners to help them make that go region-wide. It's interesting to note that there are approximately 4,000 signals connected to Audi's system right now, and 1,400 of them are ours. So that's a significant contribution.
Yes. Anything, Mr. Tunk or Mr. Yates, you'd like to add to the discussion from today?
Scott did a great presentation and really tickled he did it. And I think it's great to let the whole CTB know what's going on with the white paper report. And there's some technology, as he mentioned, that's so far out that we can't spend a lot of time on it, but there's some that we should.
Mr. Johnson.
Scott, if you would, how about thinking about coming to the Rail Committee and giving your presentation on Hyperloop?
I'd be glad to do that. I'd have to miss a technology committee. That's a good idea, actually, because the technology aspect of rail is something we haven't spent a lot of time on.
The only last thing before you step down, the 4 buckets now that you're kind of covering, just to make sure the board is understanding where your priorities are.
Yes, so there are 4 priorities for the Office of Innovation, and I will tell you that I have reconfigured the project discussion from last month to really reflect those buckets so that we can talk about the program as opposed to individual projects. But the 4 buckets are data and analytics, obviously a key one for us as we move forward. Connectivity, both for VDOT to operate more effectively, but also to contribute to the larger effort to bring connectivity to all parts of Virginia. VDOT in particular has considerable resources that we can bring to bear on that effort, and we want to make sure that we're doing that as well as we can. The third one is Automated Virginia. So we've talked a lot about automated vehicles, and we'll continue to do that, but it also includes the UAS that I spoke with you about a number of months ago, and and the shared use mobility piece, those all sort of play together. And electrification comes in there too, so that goes on the list. And then the fourth bucket is cybersecurity, which really underpins everything we're doing, because if we don't have a secure system, if our technology is not robust enough to ensure that it can't be corrupted, then the rest of it falls apart. So that is sort of the underpinning to the other three buckets.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Williams, we have an update on your subcommittee?
The Underground Utility
Yes.
Committee. The big issue we face is the coordination of underground utilities on construction projects. The utilities and the contractors all agree that when VDOT does a design bid build, they take care of the utilities ahead of time, and the utility companies in concert would all agree that that is a very good process and works extremely well with VDOT. Design build, not so much. The responsibility for the utility relocation is with the contractor or the locally administered projects. The same problem just comes up again and again and again. And oftentimes you have three losers in the process. So what we've tried to do is come up with the best management practices to bring back to the board for a policy decision that takes what's working currently. I mean, what VDOT is doing right now, if they're ahead of the project in a design bid build, everyone agrees works very well. So we're updating that manual. Some of the things we're considering is additional training by VDOT to train the local government people in managing underground utilities, managing projects that include them, coordinating the utilities, locating them, properly on the project, and also with the design builder having a consistent, if the design builder follows the guidelines, have a consistent process that works in all the other phases. So everybody's going to be a winner. Currently, sometimes the situation is everyone is a loser. It's never a winner and a loser in the same project, so we're trying to fix it.
Yes.
And I think what we really need to do is come back in March, if it's the Secretary's pleasure, to give a little more detailed report with some written information so everyone else can digest it. And then we should be able to come back in April with a full report. So a report for consideration to adopt as a policy. And I know Steve stays close to it because the commissioner, because his folks are involved very much with the ongoing, so hopefully they would be prepared to accept whatever responsibility for them comes out of this. So we'll come back to, but more importantly than that, or more importantly than the $3.5 billion that we just agreed to spend on the bridge tunnel, I've been chairing this commission for about 6 months, and I noticed that Mr. Whitworth doesn't chair any, and he's not currently here. He's down in Florida having fun
I wonder if Mr. Whitworth is listening.
So
I'm not sure.
I would hope that tomorrow, during our voting phase, that we would establish a trash commission. We covered that today, and it was very important to the whole body. There was more discussion about that than there was about the bridge tunnel. Everybody, it was a robust discussion. Yes. And that he would chair that, and that we would I'd make that motion tomorrow, and hopefully we'll follow through. Unless he wants to leave Florida and come up here, and he can defend himself.
And this is what happens when you miss.
That's right. That's exactly right. You always get an assignment when you're not here.
Two of his former colleagues sort of got his back here, Mr. Tunk and myself, because he has seniority over you. We have his back, Mr. Whitworth. So, Marty, not happening.
He's dead.
How many seconds we get tomorrow? I don't know.
My phone's blowing up right now.
So we do hope Mr. Whitworth is enjoying the sunny warmth of Florida. So, yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. Who knew that we were actually going to get work, that this was going to produce results for us? So
It's going to be the utility
great.
commission. It's going to make a good difference.
So that's really great. Thank you very much.
We're just going to take really the best practices that VDOT already uses and just implement that throughout the industry. And it's going to be better for everybody.
Excellent. Okay, Director Mitchell?
Sure. We did announce this morning again, or just as a reminder, that we're going to be starting the second train to Norfolk on March 4th. We're very excited about that. There will be an event there in the morning. The train will be leaving at 9 a.m. This will be a new departure time for Norfolk. It does also change the departure time for the Newport News train as well, and adds an earlier train for them. We shifted around some of the existing trains in order to make that happen. So again, hopefully you all got an invitation to that, and we'd love to see any of you who are able to make it that Monday morning. So we also updated the board on the fact that on March 13th we'll be having an open house for our new Northern Virginia office for DRPT. We've actually been in it for a few weeks, but I'm really excited because it's really demonstrating sort of the larger footprint that DRPT is going to have in Northern Virginia. And it is also accessible by transit and rail, which the previous one was not. So we're excited about that. And again, anybody up there, we'd love to have you. We did go through with the Rail Committee this morning a update on where we are with our grant application cycle, which closed on February 1st. We're in the process of reviewing applications. We received 215 applications for funding in our transit program under different, all of our different programs. That does include 4 major expansion projects as well. This is the first year that we will be using the new prioritization process for our capital applications, and so we're in the process of going through all of that right now, and we expect we'll be bringing back more information to the Rail Committee in the March meeting as well. On the rail side, we also got 17 applications for funding. That includes 2 for our intercity passenger rail, 1 for our REF program, 14 for our preservation program. This year, the focus of our 6-year plan update, though, will also be incorporating funding for Long Bridge and the Atlantic Gateway program, too. So, again, more information to follow on that as our applications get reviewed and scored. I did want to just give you all an update on our Amtrak ridership as well. We saw some slight declines in December and January, which we actually attribute primarily to the government shutdown, which really affected a lot of contractors and workers in this area. We saw a decline of about 1.7% in December and another 1.4% in January. I should note, though, as well, that that includes riders that we have what's called VRE step-up tickets, where VRE riders can actually buy an Amtrak ticket, and they're counted as an Amtrak rider for that, and it's at a subsidized price. VRE saw a significant decline in ridership in January of, I think, almost 25%. So we believe that was factored into it as well. But as we get more information about that, we'll certainly let you know. The good news is we're still up about 2.3% in ridership for the year-to-date. So, and with that, that's the end of my update.
Secretary?
Science.
Ms. Mitchell, there's been a lot of back and forth about the Metro budget, and I'm just wondering if you have any comments on that.
Sure. We and our board members, Christian Dorsey and Paul Smedberg, have both been very sort of strong and forceful in their statements that we have a lot of concerns about proposals to bring back late-night service on Metro, because that really cuts into the maintenance window that WMATA has, where they really get to do a substantial amount of their track work. And really that's it's very, very important, especially with the new funding that we just approved, that WMATA be able to have the time and the resources to actually do the rehabilitation work that we need. So we're very concerned about that. Secondarily, the FTA has come out and said that because of this change and because this could have a safety impact on WMATA, that they could end up delaying certification of the Metro Safety Commission, which, as you know, for the federal deadline for that is April 15th of this year. This MSC is still in a good position to be certified, but we are concerned about that. That would affect it would create a withholding of 100% of our federal funds all of our federal funds for transit in Virginia. So that would affect all 40 of our transit agencies and 60 human service operators. It also would include, the total amount of funding that would be withheld from the region would actually be about $1.6 billion. That also includes the formula funding that WMATA gets, plus money that FTA had committed for the Purple Line in Maryland. And so that's been a significant concerns of ours too. And, but we're continuing to monitor that, and our board members are working closely with the DC board members and Maryland and federal members as well to resolve that.
So, anything else, Mr. Johnson or Mr. Smoot, from the committee meeting this morning? Okay, Commissioner?
I just have two quick updates for you. Obviously, since we met last, we did have a very large announcement for our folks up in Northern Virginia, about $1 billion of added work along 495 and 95, the extension of 2.5-mile extension of the 495 express lanes leading up to the American Legion Bridge, new ramp at the Opitz Boulevard, as well as the Occoquan auxiliary lane, all of which we announced about 2 weeks ago, which we had out there. And so we've been certainly busy between 495 and 95, and now 64 in the HRBT expansion project. So we've a lot of announcements within the last 30 days. So very positive work. On a flip side, certainly the weather forecast coming in, just making aware. Last October, November timeframe, I briefed the board just very quickly about all the tropical storms and the rainfalls, the events that we've had. It's been an extraordinary year. We're monitoring our highway maintenance and operations program fund very closely right now. Going into this storm, we have about $55 million left out of the original budget. Looking at this storm and the mobilization that we have in Northern Virginia alone, 3,000 pieces of equipment is going to be about $1 million an hour that we're going to spend in snowfall. So with this type of mobilization on a statewide basis, we are currently, as of today, projecting that we're going to come in slightly under our budget threshold, but we are monitoring our program very closely. And there's going to be about a 4 to 6 week lag in when those expenditures hit. So we may be back in the April timeframe taking a very close look at what our planned activities are for the remainder of this year and leading into next year, and maybe asking for a loan to be able to bridge a gap going from this fiscal year to next fiscal year. But we are very, very close in where our budgets are. And it's been, again, it's been an extraordinary year of weather events for us. We're still in the recovery mode. Certainly down in the Lynchburg district, still have a significant number of roadways closed because of the rain and the tropical storm events that we've had. But as of right now, I'm going to say that our projections are that we're going to come in at or underneath our budget, but again, with the uncertainty of tonight's storm coming in, we are going to spend money, unfortunately, recognizing that the temperatures are going to be back up in the 50s and 60s with the rain by the end of the weekend. So we will mobilize. We will have crews out there. We're prepared to tackle the storm and reopen the roads as soon as possible. But we will look to demobilize as soon as possible just to be able to save the money. But the movement of goods and services are going to be the paramount issue. But I just, again, want to make sure that depending on what happens, we may be back in front of you saying what services we may need to reduce just to be able to make budget this year. I'll put it, I just want to transparency and bring it to you at an early stage. One more big event. One more big event and we're done. Right. Yes.
We've been done before.
Right. We've been done before, but in this case, we're monitoring very closely, and we do have a little bit of cushion, but we can't have many more of these.
So, thank you.
Madam Secretary, unfortunately, he can't dictate whether we're going to have another one or not. But we have been through this before, and we'll get through this one just as well. So.
Yes. Well. we will. People ask me if I get nervous when we get bad weather. I just didn't want it to snow for 4 years. I do love snow, but if we could just have a little reprieve. But I will be honest with you that those who actually manage all of this under the leadership of the commissioner and our situation room, I really do not. It is pretty amazing. I feel as though I have such confidence in their abilities to manage this. We just need to make sure we address everything over on 81, Mr. Smoot. And so a lot of these improvements could help over there during bad weather as well. Thank you for bringing up the announcements for Northern Virginia. It's bringing in $1 billion new of investment in Northern Virginia with 4 major projects, including Occoquan, which we're actually going to pay for from the savings that we are able to get from the really competitive design build price, as well as negotiating the TIFIA loan savings that I will give a lot of credit to Morteza Farrajan for helping us manage that negotiation. But Transurban's been a great partner through this, so there'll be really great work. And then almost a year's worth of work in just getting the announcement for Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. And as we do that, 3,700 other projects taking place in Virginia. So there is a tremendous amount going on. I will just close by giving a great thanks that during the government shutdown, how many of our folks here in transportation really rallied to try to be as supportive as possible, whether it was front-loading transit agencies, looking for ways to we never ended up having to do this, but we were trying to find ways to help people with easy passes, making sure we weren't sending bills or charging late fees if people were not able to replenish their easy passes, and looking at Metro, what we could do with Maryland, D.C. for people to move through the corridor. But I think if anything like that were to happen again, we would be ready from the first hour. But everybody really came together to try to do what they could for, our neighbors to make sure people can manage the shutdown. And so with that, I know this is a bit of a shorter meeting for us, only because, well, for several reasons, but the most important being the fact that we're still working with the General Assembly. So do you mind saying the logistics for this evening?
Okay. Our dinner this evening, once again, it's going to be cocktails at 6 o'clock. We're at Terrence West, which is 11129 in Richmond, Virginia. We are going to have a shuttle at the hotel at 5:40. We're going to have an additional shuttle at 5:30 for another stop. And
at First National.
Bring everybody back to the hotel.
So at the, yeah. So we just pick it up at 5:30?
Yes. Yes. You'll be fine. And then it'll bring you back.
I must know really important people. That's what I would say.
And then our meeting tomorrow begins at 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock. Now, for those of you, is Rick Welton still here? For right now, the way our policies are, for those who are going home this evening, how many of you, do you mind just raising your hand if you're staying?
Staying.
I tricked you, yeah. So we're staying. So, okay. So, and you're here, right? So we will definitely have a quorum, but people can listen in, but they can't vote. Is that right, Mr. Walton?
Right.
Can we ever create a policy where they could?
There is a mechanism to do that, but again, the reasons for being able to do it electronically, there's the simple one that can do with Mr. Stinson.
You know what, I'm going to see, we are having a hard time hearing you right now. Because I know so many people have said, boy, it would be really great if we could have this policy.
Madam Secretary, there are two situations. The one we've already done, we did when we met in Winchester with Mr. Stinson, where you give advance notice or certain requirements, and you can do that. I think you're limited on the number of those you can do, and you have to do certain after-the-fact reporting. The other provision, which allows a member, due to sickness, disability, emergency, to call the chair even a day ahead of time to say, I cannot make it, I'd like to participate electronically. That requires a written policy to be adopted that addresses those situations. So, I mean, if the board desires or you desire, we can come up with a draft written policy for that situation. And then on others, like with Mr. Wentworth, if he wanted to, and we knew in advance, we could have sent out the requirements of the statute that he could have participated electronically on the meeting tomorrow.
Yeah. But I do wonder this. There are people here at this board meeting who actually work to get here, but are actually going home because of bad weather. So I wonder if that can be addressed in a policy.
The way the law reads normally it's a 3 business day notice of any electronic meeting and things of that nature. You can have special, emergency, and continued meetings where you give notice to the public at the same time you notice the members of the board. We've used that in the past where the boards had to meet to award a particular contract between meetings. It's really a situation where nothing is scheduled, but you have to call a special or an emergency meeting to address an immediate situation. In that particular situation, you can do it electronically, you can do it in person. Again, the code has various requirements depending on which electronic meeting concept you're going to operate under. Some of them require that a quorum of the board be physically present in one location. Others do not. So it will depend on the circumstances.
Well, perhaps you could draft something for the board to take a look at. And if in the future, if we needed to address the code and put in legislation to modify it to fit some real-world examples, that might also be helpful.
Okay.
Okay. So with that, we're going to adjourn the workshop, and I will see most of you tomorrow. And for those who are leaving, please be safe. Thank you.
Thank you.